to everyone who is, I will still say on time. If you could please all move forward, we don't bite at the front. And tonight's topic is one that's also very interesting. And I think Abuna would like to make sure that we're all engaged with the topic as much as possible. So tonight's topic is life or death, who decides? Do I tell them what it's about, or do you want to tell them what it's about? Okay. So we're specifically going to discuss abortion and euthanasia, which are very, I think, relevant topics, especially now, but also very controversial. I was recently having the conversation about euthanasia with some medical professionals in our community recently, and the opposing views are very interesting. So I'll hand it over to Abuna to get us started for tonight. Thank you, Abuna.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. I think a controversial topic is perhaps understating it. I think if there was a spectrum of controversy, this will be very high on the ranking. Life or death, who decides? Now, I think to be able to look at this topic, we need to look at it in a few different angles. We're going to look at it from the perspective of the worldly aspect in terms of what is it that we're advised, sometimes through medical professionals, sometimes through desires and feelings or family emotions, and through the church's perspective. And we need to find where the truth is. We need to find where the truth is. Why? Because as you know, not everything you see and not everything you hear, not everything that you're told in terms of how the world sees things is our truth. Is our truth. So I want this to be a very open type of session. I want you to be curious. I want you to ask. Because too many times we sit here and we listen and we take things as is. And then we walk away and say, well, why did Abuna say this? Why does the church think this? How is it that in this day and age we are perhaps not modernized in our thinking? So I'll go through and unpack these three aspects, but I encourage you to join in because there's so many different angles that we can speak about in this particular topic. So to start off, perhaps let's work on the first subtopic, which is abortion. I'm going to ask, just as a show of general knowledge, does anyone know what's the average number worldwide? This is on the World Health Organization, WHO. Does anyone know worldwide the average of unintended or unplanned pregnancies? Give me a number. How many? Can you Google? No, you can't Google. Because you have to go to WHO because you get different responses. Take a guess.
I'm not going to remember the mic, by the way. So.
In a year.
I'm going to guess. I'll start the lowest, 22,000.
You're so kind.
Is that? It's not the lowest one.
No. Even more. Any other guesses? 50,000? No. It's in the millions. It's 121 million. 121 unplanned pregnancies. Unplanned pregnancies. Now, this is unplanned pregnancies where there was no plan to have a baby and they're surprised. Of that, of the 121 million unplanned pregnancies, does anyone want to guess the number that are aborted? He Googled it. 73 million are aborted. 73 million are aborted. That's 61%, and this is a statistic that was averaged to 2020. And this is a statistic that continues to rise. 61% are aborted. And if you look at it and you kind of bring the number down to something that's beyond the large number that we have, if you bring it down to a number per week, just per week, 1.4 million embryos, fetuses, babies are aborted a week. And we talk about atrocities of war, and we talk about atrocities of natural disasters, volcanoes, earthquakes, and what have you, and we get really consumed in the emotions. But when you listen to some of these numbers, this is mass death. Mass death. On an astronomical scale. And it continues to rise, as we said. So it begs the question, why is it that this many deaths are not prominent and not forward in how the media portrays it or how the world portrays it as a disaster? Why doesn't the media report on it and say mass death? Why do they leave it alone? Rob?
I think two reasons. The first reason is the embryo has no voice to speak up. That's the first reason. The second thing is population control, to make sure that resources are enough for everyone. Because if we don't have abortions, then we have no control over population growth.
Sure. But population growth can be contained in perhaps a government policy, like we've seen in some of the Asian countries. You cannot have more than one child. That was the rule in China for quite some time. So there are other aspects in terms of population control. But why is it that the media and the world turn a blind eye to it? Anthony? A choice. Similar to what Rob was saying on his first point. A choice of what? And for who? And who gets to make that choice?
The woman, because of the pro-life movement, which is actually one of the devil's seeds.
Pro-life movements and the woman.
Pro-choice, you mean, not pro-life.
Pro-choice, sorry.
Pro-life is the good one.
Pro-life
we want
is the
that
good
one.
one. Pro-choice.
We don't want...
Pro-choice. Okay.
Which is
So
ironic.
if we look at it from a humanitarian perspective, what is that being portrayed as? Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
That
They say
women-
it's a good thing. Why do they say it's a good thing?
because I think this also goes back to like the whole feminism thing that we were talking about a few weeks ago. That like women can do what they want with their body. No one can tell them what they should do. They have autonomy, sovereignty. Also forgetting what the woman's role actually is in society and what she was designed for.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to leave the designed for thing just on the side for now. But it's a function of a role of women in society. Now, if we come and put this into real life examples, let me give you the first scenario. First scenario is a young lady that was dating a young man. They fell in sin. And essentially, they're not married, not even engaged, even if they're engaged. But they're not ready to be married. Should this be a reason to abort the child in terms of what's the community going to think, what's my parents going to think, what is going to happen in terms of my aspirations, in terms of our careers, our planning. We don't have money. What do? Is that a valid reason? I'm seeing a few shakes of the head. Let's take scenario number 2. We've got 2 couple, and God's blessed them with abundant fruits. They've got 7 children. And all of a sudden, she falls pregnant again. Number 1, she's not working. He's working. His income is not enough. He's working 2 jobs just to put food on the table for the 9 mouths, 7 kids and the 2 parents. There's no pets in the equation, just to simplify it. And there simply isn't enough capacity or room to work anymore, to have any more income, to be able to have a child. In fact, they can't even buy a bigger car. That's it. That's the biggest car that they can buy. Kia Carnival. 9 people. Is that a reason to abort? You can get a bus. Okay. Who's your confession, Father? Another scenario. A young girl has an evening lecture at university. Middle of winter, quite dark, goes to the car park to get into her car, gets raped. Is that a reason to abort?
We had a female gynecologist give us that talk about rape, and she goes, they use that now as a movement as an excuse for abortion, but the probability of happening from rape due to what happens to the woman psychologically for the embryo to actually, be fertile and survive is like so small. Like it's very small. Not that she's negating rape or whatever, but like she's just saying it's very, 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 very hard for a woman to fall pregnant from rape. So, yeah.
But it can. There is still a probability.
Yeah.
So the question is, should that person abort? Scenario number 4. Husband and wife, happily married. They've had a wonderful first few years of their honeymoon extended. Now it's time to start a family. And they go about the right ways to start the family. And the young lady falls pregnant. And part of the blood tests, they find that given that they're both of Mediterranean background, they both have a trait in their DNA called thalassemia. And 2 carriers, if they have thalassemia minor, they'll be perfectly fine, but there's a probability that the child will have abnormalities. And in one of their trimesters, they come to do a scan and their fear is realized. The child will have abnormalities, whether it be disabled, whether it be sight or hearing, whether it be Down syndrome. The spectrum is large. It will set them up for a life of service for that child. Should they abort? These are all the real questions. These are all the real questions. These are all the questions that face not just the world, but communities like ours. And so the question needs to be answered with the right truth. As we said earlier, the world's truth is that there's a movement in terms of allowing the women to have the liberties in terms of choosing. But if, please.
It is true that there is, with the movement of feminism, there is a greater right to choose that's being pushed. But as well as that, there's a correlation between marriages falling apart and abortion.
Absolutely. And look, there's, like I said, there's so many streams that this topic goes into. So there's the one
so
of...
there's a male and female.
There's the
so
one
the
of,
male,
impacts on the marriage and troubles at home. There's the one that we heard in terms of Centrelink benefits earlier. There's the one that we heard about the movement's rights. There's the one that we heard about the actual health aspect of the relationship, not the spiritual health or the emotional health, but the actual physical health. There's many streams. But I want to come back to the core question. The core question. When a couple or a young lady or that lady and her parents, depending on which situation that we spoke about, make that decision, who are they making the decision for? And who are they making the decision on behalf of? They're making it for themselves. They're making it based on
because their comfort.
What they see the situation for them in their eyes is currently and future. So then the next question is, who makes the decision for this unborn baby? Maybe before that, I know that's a question in all the back of your mind, so let's bring it out. Abuna, when does it become a baby? When does it have the life? Again, the standards of the world, they say, well, look, if it's still an embryo, it's just the egg's been fertilized, it's just, all it is a bunch of cells. And that's it. So until it's in X weeks, then don't guilt yourself. You're just treating it like a period would happen. That's not the truth. How do we know that that's not the truth? We know that God is the creator of life. As we start the Gregorian liturgy, it says, "O you who are the author of life." He creates life. And he created life from the point that the egg was fertilized. He granted it life to be able to organically grow and be nurtured within the mother's womb and continue to become the full fruition of being his image as a son or daughter. It's a gift that's being given, a gift of life. And as such, when we look at it from that perspective, then we are opposing God's grace in the gift of life. We're opposing God's grace in the gift of life. But Abuna, how do you know? Well, if we look at some of the examples. When St. Mary went to Elizabeth, St. John was already in her womb and he leapt for joy. He was already sensing the Holy Spirit that was embodied in St. Mary and the presence of Christ incarnate within her womb. And this was a fetus. When the Holy Spirit came and overshadowed St. Mary, and allowed Christ to become incarnate? Was that just an egg? No. Life begins from that point. In fact, if you look at it from the scientific perspective in terms of the mathematical probability of an egg being fertilized, and it happens such that it can give life, the numbers are astounding. The numbers are astounding. That's why sometimes in terms of falling pregnant, it's not that easy. It's not that easy. So first of all, we have to recognize that this is a gift of God, that this is not something that because it's happening within us and through us that we get to control. And not because the world looks at it from a convenience perspective in terms of, I don't want this sick child for the rest of my life. I don't want this baby that came out of wedlock because of the shame that it will bring in the community. I don't want this child that was brought into the world because of the rape that occurred. I don't want this child because we can't afford them. You're essentially standing there and saying to God, no, I don't value your creation of life. And so, to come and look at this from a biblical perspective, we need to see these children as gifts. These 121 million that are unintended are gifts. The 73 million that are aborted are gifts. The 1.4 million that are aborted per week are gifts. So much so that King David in Psalm 127, verse 3 says, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. But you'll say to me, hold on, Abuna. Where does it say in the Bible that you can't abort? Sure, it says that if you do anything bad to one of these little ones, it will be better if a what? Millstone was hung around your neck. It doesn't say about them coming. Has anyone heard of the Didache or Didache? What is it?
It's the writings of the first, how the Christians lived in the 1st century.
So essentially, the disciples becoming apostles, as they started to preach across the world, they found that they needed a way to set their belief in an order that is befitting of the name of Christ. And so they came up with canons that is called the Didache in the 1st century. And this is an excerpt from it. The excerpt is, you shall not murder a child by abortion, nor kill that which is born. Black and white. You shall not murder a child by abortion, nor kill that which is born. So, in the 4 scenarios that we've seen, there's actually a 5th scenario as well, in terms of those that look at it in a new way. Who's ever heard of the terminology DINKS? DINKS. It's not a bad word. What does it stand for? So there's a new, in the last 20 years or 10 years perhaps, there's a new part of society that is looking essentially solely at themselves. They're called dual income, no kids. They have fur babies, yeah. Yeah. And what's their objective in life? Their objective in life is that what they want to enjoy life. They want to live it, whatever they earn, they want to spend. I was actually reading an article about one that spent, $30 million to buy a unit in a cruise ship that goes around the world every 365 days. That's their retirement plan. And obviously being a couple, they live as a couple, married. Regardless of how much birth control they try, there's always a chance. And to keep their lifestyle, abortion is the only way. So where's the focus? Where's the focus? We see so many wonderful examples of those that were born perhaps not in the right setting, but became wonderful saints. Who knows the story of Saint Marina? What happened to Saint Marina? She was disguised as a monk because there was no convents at that time. And because as a monk, she was obviously a lady, she seemed fair and had a soft voice. Everybody loved the monk Marine. And then a young lady that fell in sin with a soldier became pregnant, and the soldier said, blame it on the monk Marine. And they did. And she was chastised by the abbot of the monastery, kicked out, in fact. And the parents of that young lady forced upon her the child to bring up. She said nothing. She continued to nurture this child in every way she can, through feeding him, spiritual nourishment, in every way possible. And this child that was born of sin became a monk himself. We see the beautiful story of St. Moses, who was born to pagan parents who were slaves, living who knows what life. And of him became one of the greatest saints in our church. So our role here, because as Ines said, it's not just usually the young lady that has to make these decisions. Sometimes the young man as well, or the parents, or the siblings, or whoever that support network is. Our role here is to look at the life that God created and ask ourselves, are we worthy of receiving this life into our family, or is it our convenience that prevails? There's a beautiful true story of this couple, and it was a young guy, his wife, high flyers in terms of career, and he used to be and really look after himself, you know, the suits and the cologne and going to the barber every 2 weeks, and had to look every part, you know, chic. They had the first child, and then shortly after they had the second child. And the second child was born blind. He was devastated. How is it that this is the image I give to the world in terms of, like, you know, I'm wealthy, I'm powerful, I am driven, I am the best, and I've got a blind child. This doesn't go with my image. And slowly started to separate him from the family, and he used to distance himself from the child in shame. One day he got up on a Sunday morning and he found his youngest, the one that was blind, crying. And he said to him, why are you crying? I said to him, Baba, because Mummy is really sick and she can't take me to church today. I'm not going to be able to go to the liturgy. This is my favorite part in the week. And he kept on crying. Now this man, Sunday morning was his outing time with his friends. So he was already dressed up. And he said, look, just to quieten him down so Mum can rest, I'll take you. We'll go spend like 15, 20 minutes in church. I'll bring you back, tick the box. I go on with my life. You can just stay home and leave it at that. He took him to church, and the young boy said, I need to stand at the front because I want to listen to what the deacons are saying. So he brought him to the front and he stood with him. And he saw his son praising and praising and praising. And the joy that came from his son's praise touched his heart. And he started to take it as a mission for him to bring that young child every week to the liturgy. And through this young child, this man came back to the church and was able to find God again in his life and was able to find again the love that he needed to have for his wife and both his children in his home through a blessing that was blind. This is the gift that God gives in life. The gift. And that's why David, the king and the prophet, says that they're a heritage and a reward. But let's transition now that we've taken the concept of life is granted from God and it's precious and it counts and it means everything to Him. Because even if those embryos are destroyed, they're still in front of Him as His creation. Where are they in heaven? I don't know. Perhaps He's treating them like the 144,000 that are under the altar that were martyred by Herod for the sake of Christ and continue to ask the Lord to exact His revenge. Perhaps. Imagine now millions asking the Lord to exact revenge for taking their gift against those that made those decisions. Doesn't that put that into a different perspective? We blame King Herod in terms of his zeal for continuing to be king and rule over. And so he did the unspeakable. Why isn't this treated the same? So no, in the church's eyes, we can't be King Herods and take life for our own personal gain, rest, privilege, and everything else. Even in the 4 cases that we spoke about, even in the case of rape. You're going to say, Abuna, how is that possible? I'm going to say that the act was heinous. But a life has been granted. Despite the amount of probability being extremely low, as we heard, but life has been granted. And if this is a cross, the mental anguish, spiritual anguish, it's a cross. Blessings will come, like we heard from that story of the blind child. The story of Saint Marina, the story of Saint Moses. All wonderful testaments to God's creation being valued. Can I put one more perspective in? Because I think you guys are all thinking this question, but no one's asking, so I'm going to tell you anyway. The question is, Abuna, there has to be always the tender heart of the church to see an exception to this rule. There is only one exception. Does anyone know? If the mum's life is in danger. Or if the mum's life and the fetus's life is also in danger. If the mum dies, the fetus can die. So in the instance where the mother's life is in danger, that she will die, if she continues to have this child, or bear this child, or go through the pregnancy, this is the only time that the church allows, because essentially it's allowing a life to exist as opposed to two lives ending. A life to exist as opposed to two lives ending. In terms of the question around adoption, so where we see the beautiful story saying Marina, she essentially adopted, didn't say a word. In the aspect of our church and adoptions, I'm not going to talk about the law of the land, because the law of the land is very complex in terms of adoption. But if you're able to open your house to a stranger and welcome him in as one of your family members, then this is following God's command when he says, you saw me hungry, you saw me thirsty, you saw me naked, and you took me in. The other way around being giving up for adoption. This one's a very tricky one. It's going to be based on the circumstance, because as you can imagine, the reasons will be aplenty. And if the reason is going to be based on convenience, no. If the reason is going to be based on the fact that this child is going to actually receive or be in harm's way and be in a position where they would be deprived of their basic liberties in terms of being able to be looked after and fed because the home is broken, or there is drug abuse, or what have you, the issue, or perhaps violence, then the church looks at that too. But I want to say something as well to them, is that these little ones, when God says that they're precious, he means it. He means it. There's a beautiful true story. These are all true stories, by the way. There's no story I'm going to tell you that's not true. There's a beautiful true story of a couple that were atheists, and they essentially had a daughter. She was young, and they were having issues in their marriage for various reasons. And the husband was abusive, domestic violence, and it continued to prolong for a while, and the occurrences grew in magnitude every time. And one day, this man, he really was so angry that he couldn't see clearly in front of him, and he got a gun and shot his wife in front of his daughter, who was like 4 or 5 years old. And when he came to from that fit of anger, saw his wife on the ground, he then shot himself. All in front of this girl who's 4 or 5 years old. Atheist. Has no relation to God or knows anything about God. When the neighbours called the police came and broke the house down, broke the door down, went in and found the girl curled up in the corner of the room on the ground, just hugging her knees. They couldn't find the next of kin, so they went to the closest orphanage, which was run by a Christian family. And that Christian family basically has a lot of people that are helping, and they try to bring Christ to the kids that have been orphaned or have been left or discarded. And in the first day she was there, she was brought into the hall with the same age kids, and the lady that was looking after them made them sit into a big circle. And she got like a chair and put a chair down and got a picture of Christ. Just a nice picture of Christ, and put it on the chair. And she said to the kids, "Do you know who this is?" And all the kids put up their hand because they've been telling them about God. She was surprised to find that little girl, she put up her hand. So she was curious and said to her, "Do you know who he is?" And she said, "No, I don't know his name. But I know that when Dad and Mum were on the ground, that he was sitting next to me, hugging me, and telling me, 'Don't worry, everything is going to be okay.'" even if the mother doesn't look after her child, God would never leave. Did I answer your questions? Thank God. But that's the truth. That's our truth. This is the truth that the church has shared with us. Is that every single one of this ghastly number is precious in front of Him. Is precious in front of Him. Can I get someone to bring up, this is from the Deuteronomical books, the Book of Wisdom. And we can go to chapter 1. And I'll get someone to read from verse 12 to 15 as our transition into our next wonderful topic of the night, and very closely related, which is euthanasia. Who came up with tonight's topic? I really want to know. I did approve it. I didn't know I was going to do the talk. No, I wasn't. I'm honoured. Can I get someone to please read from verse 12 to verse 15?
Do not court death by the error of your life, nor procure your destruction by the works of your hands, because God did not make death, nor does He rejoice in the loss of the living. For He created all things that they might exist, and He made the nations of the world curable. And there is no medicine of extermination in them, nor a kingdom of hell upon the earth. For justice is perpetual and immortal.
Wonderful. Do not court death by the error of your ways. Don't play with death. Nor invite destruction through the work of your hands. Could be the abortion case. But we're going to start talking about euthanasia now. Because God did not make death, nor does He rejoice in the destruction of the living. God created everything. But what Solomon is pointing out here is that He didn't create death to have dominion over us. But through the original sin, it did. But we know that in another 7.5 weeks, we'll be celebrating His resurrection, which defeated the sting of death. So death no longer has dominion over us. What death is a transition from our current physical state to that of the heavenly state. That's all it is. That's all it is. So if we look at it that perspective, and then we come to the topic of euthanasia. Does anyone know what the word actually means, euthanasia? Good death. It's actually a Greek word made up of two parts, eutha and nasia. Good death. How is it a good death? Not the Greeks, no. They concatenated two words from the Greek language. It doesn't mean the Greeks came up with it. Good because it's painless. What else? You guys at the back, contribute. Maybe come closer. And it's a choice. So it's good because it's a choice. A choice made by the individual. Actually, do you know that there's more than one category of euthanasia? There's actually the voluntary and the involuntary. What's the difference?
Voluntary is when someone chooses to die in, let's say, 20 years. So they go and they take some pill or whatever it is so that they can die at that age that they want to die. That's voluntary. And then involuntary is when you're going through some sort of, terminal illness or whatever it is. Yeah, that.
Wonderful. So voluntary is that the patients made the decision. I haven't heard about the pill of the 20 years. I've heard the opposite. I've heard those that die and they've paid millions of dollars to have themselves frozen. such that once again, when technology can bring life back, that they've got their bodies and their minds and everything there. So I love the diversity of people. Very interesting. No, it's but whoever's marketed it has made a good job of it, obviously. So it is the voluntary one is someone that chooses to go through and end their life. What's the difference between that and suicide, though? What's the difference? The same and rebranded? Panamax?
Hang on. Standy. My faucet.
I was saying that I'm not sure about what it's like in other countries, but I think in Australia, to play devil's advocate, the difference would be in order to qualify for voluntary assisted dying, you have to have a life expectancy less than 12 months. So you have to be actively dying already.
Correct. And different countries treat it in different ways, different legislations. So it's someone that's already on their path to dying because of a particular illness or disease or complication that is going to end their life at a predicted point in time. Whereas in the case of suicide, this is someone taking their own life without the complication from health perspective, perhaps mental health, but not physical health, that's got a estimated date of when their body will actually fail. So one is you're going to die because you've got a health problem. The other is you're not going to die, but you take your own life. We won't talk about suicide. We already know the perspectives on suicide through Sunday school days. But we're going to talk about euthanasia in the aspect of assisted and also the involuntary. The involuntary, just to phrase it and give it a dimension, it's for someone that is essentially come to a point where they can no longer sustain life, usually on life support machines. And in terms of the medical practitioners having empathy on the patient and in conclusion with their family, they turn off the life machine or they essentially start giving them drugs to help speed up the process like morphine or something else. And this is someone that's essentially clinically brain dead or nearing that point. And so if we unpack that, obviously the people that are close to death, this is a function of mercy. And it's usually done in one of the hospitals that are like Calvary down the road, which is a hospital specific for this. It's being able to see that person through their last day or days. But the one where the patient chooses. What are some of the scenarios? Let me throw some scenarios at you. A patient that is essentially in their 60s, they've been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer spread all over their body. They can't take the pain. They know that this is going to be a journey for the next 2 years of chemotherapy or whatever therapy, and they don't want to take that path. And they want to choose not to even allow the disease to take its course, but they want to end their life now and avoid the pain. What's our perspective on that? It's a difficult one. You're going to say, Abuna, we're not in their shoes. They are not able to sleep at night because of the pain that they suffer. The medication that they take is not enough. Endone and all these heavy drugs. Their quality of life is gone. They can't sit with their spouse, or they can't actually be able to do anything for themselves. They've become a liability for their household. They have to be wheeled around in a wheelchair. So is that an act of grace and an act of mercy that they take their life now? What do you guys think? Let me give you another scenario. We've been speaking about abortions, but we'll continue on with the other end of the spectrum. A baby is born, didn't complete the 9-month, came out 7-month, lots of complications, put into the crib, supported by machines. No one knows if they're going to survive or not. Do you continue, or do you say no, pull out the plug? I'll give you one more scenario and then I'll take your question. A young man driving home on the freeway one day, and he's in his lane, doing everything right. All of a sudden, a truck comes, brakes are faulty, rear ends the car, spinal damage. He's become a vegetable. I'll share another one with you. This is one I saw with my own eyes. A young girl, 12 years old, goes with mum and dad to a chicken fast food place. I'm not going to say the name. Okay. She ate chicken that was not prepared properly, and essentially the salmonella poisoning made her brain dead. Age 12, Coptic child here in Sydney. Do you end her life? What do you do? I had a hand up there. Is it still relevant as a question? Please ask. James? And then Chloe. I saw half a hand as well. I'm taking full hands, half hands, everything.
I don't know how to address all the scenarios. I think one thing to think about, I was just listening to a podcast, this idea came from that. I think these days we've become, I guess, kind of desensitized to, or not desensitized to death, but we don't really understand it fully because it seems that it's kind of been pushed to like a corner. We try and hide it from society. Like when you're dying, you go to a terminal ward, and maybe like people's like grandparents and great-grandparents don't stay with the families anymore, so the kids don't really see family members like dying or in the process of dying. And I feel like even like historically we've had methods of sedation for a while, but didn't really go down the path of euthanasia. So maybe we had like sedation via gas, where you'd like breathe in a gas, and so you could euthanize someone after they're sedated. But it's only recently, kind of recently, that I feel like, I could be wrong, but we've gone down the path of euthanasia. And I feel like that's less to do with mercy and more to do with trying to not deal with the reality of death. I think also that, and this is now just my personal perspective, is that death, or maybe when we decide as Christians to follow Christ, we follow Christ to the cross and whatever form that takes. So because he died and endured the pain and suffering that comes with being a human being, maybe death, or however, like sickness, whatever form death takes, can be seen as a path to the cross. And because, as he says, a servant is not greater than his master, we are not better than God to say, oh, we can stop the pain and we can, absolve ourselves from that.
If I paraphrase death as kind of the solution to the pain and the suffering, as opposed to following the path of the cross. Right? Wonderful. Chloe.
So my question's about...
We're doing statements, not questions.
Oh.
No, of course you can do a question.
Sorry. Each scenario that you were saying, the question kept repeating in my head, and I'm not really sure how to phrase it, but whether it's a person, for example, in scenario A, they're terminally ill and they're not comfortable, or a baby in a coma and parents make decisions, or an enduring guardian, or someone who's responsible, who does the spiritual burden kind of fall on more, them or the doctor who administers it? Because it's their due diligence to do so, I guess.
Okay, great question. I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to give a bit more context first. So 3 parts that we want to have a look at. One is where it's the parents make the decision, like, for example, that 12-year-old child that had the chicken that was not cooked. Number 2, it's where the parent or the actual person makes that decision. And number 3, it's where the medical professional make that decision. Where the medical professional make that decision, this is in consultation. If the patient's able to be consulted and they're essentially nearing their expectancy for that particular ailment or disease or whatever's plaguing them, then they will decide with the patient, and they give them the option in terms of, should we resuscitate you if you pass out? Should we try continuing further treatment or not? And they give them the option in terms of, again, do they keep them on life support or not? And this is usually, again, for under conditions of enduring guardianships and all these other legal aspects that the family needs to have. So if they can't make the decision, they can make the decision on their behalf as well. But this is where the medical profession comes in and takes that medical angle of, this person is going to be clinically dead in a day, 3 or 10. What do you want to do? Our recommendation is, if they're clinically dead, then you should let them go because of quality of life, etc., etc., etc. And some people have taken this all the way to the High Court. There's been many scenarios where people take it to the High Court because they want their dad to stay on the life support, or mum to stay on the life support, even though they're dead. We let emotions play into it. But if they've passed, then we should be confident in that. The other aspect is where the parent makes a decision on behalf of the child, that it's made on the aspect of not allowing them suffering any further. But if that person is in a vegetative state, who's the pressure on? Is it the child or the parent? Maybe they are in a bit of pain. Maybe they're in a lot of pain. But as the parent, you become responsible in front of God for that decision. And in terms of the person making that decision, then they're liable for themselves in front of God. And so, as we look at these different angles, we come back to what we just read in the Book of Wisdom, that this life belongs to the author of life. And we should be looking at it as the gift that he's granted us. And the gift is never going to be perfect. You all know that he said, in the world you will have tribulations, but be of good cheer, I will overcome the world. The most beautiful array that I've seen in terms of someone enduring calamities and allowing God to essentially be the author of their life is someone by saying the name of Saint Gregory the Illuminator. Anyone heard of him? The Armenian. What happened to him? So this is in the third century of the church. And Saint Gregory, he was from the Armenian church. And the ruler at that point in time, he continued to try to persuade them. His name was King Tridatius III, continued to try to persuade them to follow pagan worships. And they continued to be steadfast in the faith through St. Gregory encouraging them and leading them as a good shepherd should. The king got so exhausted from trying to persuade him that he took him, publicly tortured him severely. It said that he had limbs cut off, eyes plucked out, hair torn, and many other atrocities. And then he didn't give him the satisfaction of martyrdom. He said, I'm going to now take you and throw you in one of our deepest wells so you can die there a horrible death. And that will be what brings your sheep my way. Through God's grace, when this saint was thrown into the well, he survived. And God revealed to a woman in the town that he was still alive. And she will come to the well every day and drop some food and some nourishment so that he can survive. Do you know how long he stayed in the well in this state before he was taken out? 30 years. He stayed in that state for 14 years. 14 years. You can imagine the excruciating pain that he endured from the tortures and left amongst dust and rubble. No hygiene, no bandages, no nothing. No medicine, no painkillers. And he didn't give up on life. He could have very easily said, I'm not going to eat. Might as well die. I'm going to die anyway. In fact, God, why don't you take me now? Like we saw with Jonah just a little while ago. But no. And God gave him grace and he continued. Do you know why he was only there for 14 years and not longer? At that time, in the 14th year that he was in this deep well, the king that tortured him became severely ill and was in his deathbed. The king's sister had a vision that night, even though she was a pagan worshipper, that this saint was still alive in the same place that her brother, the king, had thrown him. And this king will only be saved through his prayers. So she told her brother, and her brother had someone go and check, and they found him and they fished him out. And he came and prayed for this king, and the whole kingdom became Christian. And in fact, he became the first Armenian patriarch. 14 years. Why? His joy was in God. His strength was in God. His hope was in God. Was he tormented? Yes. Was it painful? Absolutely. Was he fought with all kinds of temptations of the mind in terms of ending his life? 100%. But he knew that the author of life was he that owned this life, not him. And if you can imagine the first council in 400, it is said that all the bishops that came to that council came in exact the same fashion, because it was after the period of the torments and the tortures and Diocletian, and this is where King Constantine had reigned. And so they all came into the council missing limbs, missing eyes, missing hair, missing teeth, scarred and wounded, but still came. Still came. Abuna, this is Yani saints, and you're talking about someone that's on a different sphere. But we see the same in a lot of people that have God as their center throughout this painful journey of sickness and ailment. We see this with Saint Pishoy Kamel. Abuna, he's still a saint. Okay, Dave Mesh. I'll tell you another story about something that I had the blessing of witnessing. This is a wonderful family, wonderful servants of the church. And the father was diagnosed with brain cancer. And his diagnosis happened in the Holy 55 days. In fact, when he found out, it was just 2 days before Passion Week. And he decided not to tell his family anything for that week, such that they can enjoy the Passion of the Christ, spend the full week in the church and focus on their life with Christ. This was his mindset. After Easter and after they celebrated, he told his family and they all freaked out. How could you not tell us? You've wasted a week and a half or 2 weeks. We need to go and we need to do and we need to scan and then they went around to the best surgeons. We have to do the surgery. We have to take this cancer out. Surgeon said to them, this type is never going to go away. He's going to die from it. They said, no, our faith is in God. Our faith is big. We're never going to give up. And so the man agreed to his family's wishes, did the first surgery. Brain surgery is never easy. And so they removed as much of the cancer as possible, and part of his quality of life degraded. But he's still happy to do it for his family. If there was a chance, of course. As predicted, the cancer came back. And it wasn't even a year, it was like 8 months. And so the family again, no, well now this surgeon perhaps is not as aggressive, we're going to go to the most aggressive surgeon. And they went to one that was renowned in the media here in Sydney. I'm not going to mention names, because he was known to be very aggressive. And they did the second surgery. And his quality of life deteriorated even more. But he was happy for their sake, all the time knowing that his time is coming. Throughout the entire journey, and even before this man got sick, we saw him as a wonderful servant in the church, and we knew that he lived a very righteous life. But even more so in his sickness, him and his Bible were inseparable. Inseparable. And so after the second surgery, the cancer came back. So the family got together and they invited Abuna from the church to go and sit with them. And they're talking about what are they going to do. And the family straight away, we need to have a third surgery. We need to try again. And then he said to them, we already saw the first surgery and the second surgery. Do you think this is maybe God's will? And he was saying it so calm and relaxed. In fact, he was smiling. And his children are saying, no, what are you talking about? How could you be smiling? You're going to die. We don't want you to die. We love you. You have to stay here. But he said to them, we saw 2 surgeries. This is God's will. So they spoke to the doctors. And the doctor said that if he has a 3rd surgery, his quality of life will make him in a vegetative state. We strongly advise against it. And so they had no choice. And so throughout the rest of his journey, in terms of the cancer continuing to impact his whole being, they found peace in him. Their anxieties were quietened because of him. Their emotions were comforted because of him. Why? Because he himself was confident. He knew that he was going to meet his Creator. He knew that this journey was going to be a painful one. It took 2 years for that man. But he knew he was going to his Creator. Amidst the pain, amidst the suffering, amidst everything that he endured, this gave him joy. And so when we come to the concept of euthanasia, and the concept of having the power to take one's life, a person taking their own life, not suicide, but ending it because of the troubles and the tribulations they're living. St. John Chrysostom has a beautiful saying. He says, let no one, even in the midst of troubles, speak of self-destruction. To kill oneself is not deliverance from suffering, but rather a deeper descent into it. A deeper descent into it. People see death as an end to my suffering, but St. John Chrysostom is saying, no. This is the beginning of your suffering for taking your own life. Why? Because you'll separate yourself from your Creator forever. Forever. So endure, carry the cross, give thanks, seek His mercy and His comfort through your pains, and He will never leave you. And only then can we truly say the famous verse of St. Paul, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day. You have to work for it, even in suffering. So if we take a step back, we spoke about 2 very heavy topics today. Abortion and euthanasia. We established that the gift of life is from the author of life. It doesn't belong to us. It belongs to Him. And perhaps some of the suffering that we see in the journey is a gift from Him in this life to prepare us to be ready and to be refined in the furnace and shaped in His image such that we can be with Him. And so we have to be careful of what the world tells us in terms of no, you have the right, you have the decision, you have the authority. But they've forgotten that their life is not theirs. May our Lord grant us the wisdom to be able to truly see Him as our Father, the one that gave us life, the one that our life belongs to, the one that we've been gifted to live and follow his path and not be tricked by the deception of this world or by the trickery of the devil that death is freedom, but it is an everlasting destruction. Whether in abortion or whether in euthanasia. Glory be to God forevermore. Amen. I know it's 9:30 now. This is a topic that we have to talk about, but we have to do it justice. And so I encourage you, if you are curious and you have a question and you are not comfortable in asking it in this forum, don't leave it as a seed of doubt. Come and ask me. Go ask your confession father. We have to be absolutely clear on our position for these things. No hesitation, no doubt, no shadow of an alternative thought. Any other questions? Anthony, are you just rubbing your nose or you've got a question? Every question is a good question.
It was back to the abortion topic when you were talking about the exception that the church gives. What percentage of chance it would be like considered for the church to approve the abortion?
Well, we said it's only under one circumstance. One circumstance. And the one circumstance is there where the mother and the baby is going to die, or even if the mother is going to die. And there's a high probability that the embryo in her will die. So in that case, such that two lives are not lost, the church has compassion, she always has compassion, and gives grace and gives absolution for the parents to abort that child to preserve the life of that mother. That's the only condition.
So it wouldn't be approved if it's one or the other. It has to be both. Like it has to be...
The mother.
Oh, the mother.
The mother.
Okay.
The mother. Because if you derive it, if you look at it mathematically, if the mother dies, the fetus, the embryo, dies. So it's the mother. Based on complications, based on ability to have a child, based on so many things that are more in the medical realm. James.
All right, Bona. So when situations like this come to you, is it like a diocese meeting? Is it just a church meeting? How does the church formulate its opinions on the situation?
So in the circumstances where an abortion is required, usually those couple go and talk to their confession father. The diocese type institution is more for challenges in terms of marital affairs or challenges in terms of abuse or children that are essentially being neglected in their homes and so on. But that type of scenario is usually direct to the confession father to discuss with the confession father. If the confession father sees that other senior clerical input is required, then there is ways to go through the diocese, but it's usually a discussion directly with the confession father.
And on the euthanasia front, has there been like any exceptions given?
No exceptions. And as we said before, like we determined the different types. So there's the one where it's voluntary, you make the choice. There's the one that's involuntary because essentially you're in a state where you are dying and you're switching off life support or enabling a comfortable passing like they see in some of the hospitals like Calvary. But in the aspect of making your own decision, no. No. Okay, we'll keep it at that. But again, if you have any questions, please come and ask. We'll stand up for announcements.
7:30.
Sit down for announcements.
Thank you, Abuna, for that very insightful talk. I hope we all leave today with something to think about. Very quickly, the meeting starts at 7:30. Because of Lent, there will be no Vespers. We will be doing Tasbihah instead. So please come and join us. It's actually a very beautiful session today. And the talk starts at about 8:15. If you would like to keep up with what is happening with the meeting and the other church services, please come and see one of the servants, myself, Andrew, Rob, Irini, Daniel at the back, Jacob, Phil, and we can add you to the WhatsApp group if you haven't already been added. And please follow the youth social media page as well. And with that, we will stand up to pray.
Reagon enemen eon enemen gosant sotit ken novi sotiemon onainan kiria laiso kiria vlogis be Christos ben notie
Shopi.
Eb oran te tihirini mainanem te kirini senanem te kirini jekin novinane volje thok te tigom nem pionem pismonem pia mai shine amin. O Lord, make us way to pray thankfully, our Father who art in heaven.
Earth is in heaven, give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil through Jesus Christ our Lord. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever.
And now the love of God the Father, the grace of the only begotten Son, our Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ, the gift and fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Go in peace. The peace of the Lord be with you. Happy start of the Lenten fast, everyone. May God grant it to be a journey full of enlightenment, spiritual nourishment, and joy in every particular week that we travel. Rabbena Ma.